Dr. Claudia Reyes first heard the voice on a sealed executive runway outside Kinshasa. It belonged to a 6-year-old girl who had been found, naked and mud-slick, in a mangrove swamp 2 weeks earlier. The priest who brought the child to Claudia guided her by the forearm, as though handling something either sacred or venomous. The child did not resist. She walked with the off-balance grace of an animal more accustomed to climbing than standing. Her file named her Victoire, but the girl didn't react to the word. Instead, every time the Belgian nurse tried French, Lingala, or even urgent gestures, the child answered in a liquid spiral of consonants unlike anything Claudia had heard. Syllables rose in interlocking arcs, breaking suddenly, then rushing forward again. The nurse, desperate to show progress, urged the child to drink from a cup. Victoire responded with the same cascade. To Claudia's ear, the sounds were neither arbitrary nor random. They carried rhythm, stress, the settled bones of grammar. Claudia, a professor of comparative linguistics at the University of Buenos Aires, had already built her career on studying linguistic isolates, Ainu, Basque, Sentinelese. Languages surrounded but never swallowed by the tongues of empire. Yet the longest lineages left paper trails or carved inscriptions. The language falling from Victoire's lips left no record at all, only the eerie intuition that somewhere, somehow, Claudia had already heard it. Victoire's case reports shared a disturbing pattern with 2 feral children Claudia examined the previous year. Thomas, discovered in the Patagonian scrubland clinging to a guanaco, and Shira, captured among wolves beneath the Golan Heights. None of them spoke the dominant language of their regions or any known language at all, and though they never met, each child produced identical phonemes, identical melodies. The coincidence rattled Claudia awake many nights, sweat-soaked, because in those nights she was no longer merely listening to the language. She was writing it. The first sleep-writing episode had occurred after her fieldwork with Thomas. She woke with black ink under her fingernails and a 40-page notebook filled front and back in an alphabet she had never consciously designed. Serpentine characters, half-drawn constellations yoked together by thorns. At the top of every page was the same date, 11th September 2043, a timestamp 22 years in the future. At the bottom was an epigraph, again and again, rendered in that same alphabet. When Claudia painstakingly transliterated it, she uncovered a Spanish sentence that chilled her marrow. El fin comienza con la palabra que no pertenece a nadie. The end begins with a word that belongs to no one. She hid the notebook in a safe, convinced it was merely the byproduct of stress, a mental purge. But when she met Shira in Israel, the phonetics buried in Shira's throat matched the graphemes of the dream manuscript like teeth sliding into gears. After Victoire, denial became impossible. Something or someone was speaking through these children, and through her sleeping hand. Claudia arranged to bring Victoire to an audiometric lab in Brussels. During the flight, the child sat motionless, unblinking at the oval window. Whenever Claudia attempted small acts of caretaking, offering headphones, a blanket, Victoire answered with short staccato bursts of the unknown language and an unyielding stare, as if chiding Claudia for asking the wrong questions. In Brussels, the equipment captured Victoire's speech in high-definition spectrograms. Claudia isolated phonemes, a bilabial trill never described in literature, a retroflex lateral that seemed impossible for a human mouth. Yet Victoire produced them effortlessly. Even more startling was the syntax. Victoire spoke in orderly 13-syllable units, each unit punctuated by a gasp of air like a swimmer turning for breath. Shira and Thomas had displayed the same cadence during their sessions. When Claudia laid the 3 spectrograms atop one another, the waves aligned as precisely as if one child had ventriloquized all 3. During the analysis, Claudia's colleague Mathieu, a pragmatic phonetician, whispered, "Could they have been coached? A cult? Some dark web orchestrator?" Claudia shook her head. Thomas lived without human contact for 5 years. Shira for 3. Victoire, we think, for 4. They came from different hemispheres, different ecosystems. To what stage could a puppeteer reach them? She left unspoken her next thought. And how did that puppeteer train my hand while I slept? That night in the guest flat, exhaustion tucked her into sleep like a weighted blanket, and the dreams arrived, electric and absolute. In the dream, she stood atop a skyscraper. Below, cities burned like censers. Ash rained until it covered the street signs, the scriptures, the faces of the dead. Above, satellites flickered out like dying stars. In place of sirens, she heard the same alien language, amplified, echoing between husked buildings. The words were not lamentations, but directions, even celebrations. The choreography of collapse. She woke to the sharp bite of pen against skin. Her right hand, autonomic, was transcribing onto the underside of her left arm. Rows of those thorn-stitched characters marched from wrist to elbow, pressing past the sting of broken dermis. Claudia seized her wrist, forcing the pen to drop, breathing ragged. The hotel clock glowed 3:13 a.m. 3 days later, she flew to Buenos Aires with Victoire. From the tarmac to the university clinic, a black SUV followed at discreet distance. Inside, men with shorn hair and identical brown suits pretended to check their phones whenever Claudia turned around. Argentina's National Security Directorate had taken an interest. They cited biolinguistic anomalies and possible bioterror vectors. Claudia laughed bitterly at the idea that language could be weaponized like anthrax. Then she remembered her arm and stopped laughing. Under mounting pressure, she digitized every recorded utterance. She fed audio files into translation algorithms, neural nets trained on the languages of Earth. The AI produced only static or ludicrous guesses. Korean, Nahuatl, Old Church Slavonic, then crashed, unable to align data. But when Claudia, on instinct, trained a rudimentary model on the alphabet from her sleep notebooks, the software flickered awake. Sentences scrolled across the monitor in clumsy Spanish. When the shelters are sealed, open the throats of the guards. The towers will fall first because they reached too high. The books will burn last because they remember too much. Claudia staggered from her chair. The phrases were unmistakably an instruction manual for insurrection, encoded in a tongue spoken only by abandoned children and scrawled during her unconscious hours. She told herself, I am a scientist. A scientist catalogs, tests, falsifies. But reason was brittle against the weight of dread. Each morning brought new pages on her nightstand, and each session with Victoire elicited more of the code. The child's vocabulary expanded rapidly, as though in dialogue with a hidden author moving Claudia's hand. Unable to confide in colleagues or government minders, Claudia phoned her estranged mentor, Professor Jin Seok Han, a semiotician who had once compared modern linguistics to counting angels while someone steals your wings. Jin Seok listened quietly, then said, You're describing a perfect glossa, an unborn language that carries zero cultural sediment. If such a language appeared, it would be the linguistic equivalent of a meteor carrying alien microbes. Evolutionary immunity? None. I'm less concerned with immunity, Claudia replied, then with purpose. The notebooks describe the end of the human order. Of course they do, Jin Seok said. Anything that erases context also erases constraint. Think of Babel in reverse. Not one tongue splintering into many, but many collapsing back to one. If everyone spoke it, no empire could police it, because every ear would already be trained. Power would shift to whoever controlled the definitions. He paused. How old is humanity's immune system, Claudia? Older than we can measure. Still, plagues happen. That night, Claudia sat by Victoire's cot, holding a condenser microphone, determined to capture every breath. Around 2 a.m., the child's eyelids fluttered. She rose, barefoot, making no sound on the tile. She approached the window, pressed her palm to the glass, and began to chant. Not speak, but chant, in that unknown language. The melody was softer now, almost tender. Claudia found it beautiful, horrifyingly so. The chords vibrated the air like cellos played underwater. Claudia whispered, "What are you saying, Nina?" Victoire turned, and for the first time addressed Claudia in Spanish, perfectly enunciated. "It is the lullaby of the last mother." Then she resumed chanting. The next morning, government agents replaced Claudia's assistants. The director of the probe, Colonel Ramos, wasted no time. "Dr. Reyes, you will surrender all notebooks and digital backups. The children will be transferred to a secure facility. This is not an academic curiosity. It is a matter of national defense." Claudia hesitated, then opened her satchel, producing what appeared to be the bound notebooks. As Ramos leafed through them, Claudia watched the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. When Ramos finished, he nodded at his men, who escorted Victoire away, the child's wrists bound by plastic loops. Claudia said nothing, her face a study in defeat. 2 hours later, alone in her apartment, she retrieved from behind the heating panel the real notebooks, the real hard drive, and the micro SD card containing audio files of every session. The decoys given to Ramos held benign field notes about moss taxonomy. Methodically, she encrypted the true data and uploaded it to multiple cloud caches under layered pseudonyms. Then she walked into the bathroom and rolled up her sleeve. The script on her arm had grown, crawling to the shoulder. Wear their uniforms, use their radios, speak the silenced words. Blood welled between glyphs. She felt neither pain nor panic, only an expanding certainty that resisting the language was now impossible. The glyphs were instructions, yes, but also invitations. If she accepted them, she might once again become something more than a custodian of doom. She could become its interpreter, perhaps its mitigator. If she refused, the words would still spread, but uncontrolled, a wildfire devouring archives and treaties alike. She booked a red-eye flight to Seoul to meet Jin Seok in person. At the airport security gate, a boarding officer scanned her passport, then looked up sharply. 2 guards approached. A soft alarm pinged. On the screen behind the desk, Claudia glimpsed an Interpol bulletin. Wanted for questioning. Dr. Claudia Reyes. The photo was an old staff ID, but the caption read, "Possible eco-terror affiliation." Claudia's heart hammered. She opened her mouth, and the unknown language vaulted out, fluid, commanding. The guards froze, eyes glassy. The boarding officer handed back her passport, murmuring, "Melun, Safrin." The same impossible syllables, as if he had always spoken them. Claudia walked through the gate untouched, adrenaline mixing with awe. On the flight, she tested small phrases on fellow passengers. A stewardess addressed her in the same tongue, offering water. An elderly man across the aisle repeated a fragment, then laughed as though pleased by a secret memory he could not yet place. Claudia realized the language was virally mnemonic. Once heard, it rewired the phonetic circuits of the listener, circumventing learned speech. But the effect was partial, unstable. Soon the stewardess gasped, "What did I just say?" The old man rubbed his temples, confused. Apparently, the neurological imprint required a sustained dose. The notebooks, script paired with prophecy, were the long game, meant to be read, reread, memorized until the language took permanent root. She felt chills. She herself had become the seed librarian of an insurgent lexicon. Over the Pacific, turbulence rocked the cabin, oxygen masks dangling. As passengers screamed, Claudia caught a word from the cockpit intercom, one syllable of the mysterious language. Then radio silence. She imagined the pilot repeating instructions written nowhere in any flight manual. The plane evened out, but fear thrummed like static. By the time she landed, Seoul's streets glittered with riot police and tear gas plumes. Giant screens downtown stuttered between K-pop commercials and emergency bulletins. In one segment, a woman stood beside a toppled statue, chanting in Claudia's alien tongue. Subtitles failed to appear. The crowd answered her chant with rocks and Molotovs. Jin Seok met Claudia in the shadows of a shuttered bookstore. His face looked older than 24 hours could explain. "It's happening everywhere," he said. "London, Lagos, São Paulo. Clips online show strangers speaking in unison, then losing comprehension of their own national languages. Governments call it a psychosis contagion. They lock down networks, but the videos multiply." Claudia removed the final notebook from her bag, flipping to the last written pages. "I found instructions for us," she said. He scanned the glyphs. "For us, or for whoever can read? Does it matter?" At that moment, sirens ululated. A text alert pinged their phones in 3 languages. Martial law declared, "Remain indoors. Report suspicious speech." Jin Seok exhaled. "We should destroy these pages." "And what then?" Claudia asked. "The children still speak. I still write." She rolled up her sleeve. New lines were crawling across her bicep even as they watched. "The tongue is a spark. Fire or light depends on the hand that strikes it." She felt, rather than heard, the echo of those words inside her skull. A second bloodstream. Around them, neon reflections shivered as distant explosions thumped like a failing heart. "Maybe," Jin Seok whispered, "we can redirect the fire. Create a counter-grammar, teach a morphology that tempers violence." "An antidote. A dialect," he said. "A meaning these words can't twist." Claudia pictured Victoire, Thomas, Shira, candles flickering in a gale, yet still alight. She imagined returning to them, forging lessons ambitious enough to outpace apocalypse, if time allowed. "All right," she said. "We'll need a secure lab, volunteers, access to multilingual corpora. And faith that language can heal what language began," Jin Seok added. Claudia stared at the notebook's final prophecy. "When the last archive opens, history will stand trial. Under oath, it will speak only in this tongue." She closed the cover. "Then let's rewrite history before it testifies." Together they walked into the smoke-streaked dawn, past shuttered cafes and abandoned cars, speaking softly to each other in a newborn dialect, wrestling each syllable into a lattice sturdy enough to cage or perhaps cradle the coming storm. Humming.